There's a moment when someone questions you, not your ideas, but you, your worth, your character. And without thinking, you flinch, you explain, you defend, you try to make it make sense. That one moment, it seems small, but it's the very second you hand over your power. Because the truth is, the more you try to be understood, the less they respect you. You say, "That's not what I meant," but they hear, "You're right, I'm weak." You say, "Let me explain," but what they see is desperation, and here's the part that stings the most. They never even wanted your explanation. They wanted to watch you squirm, and you gave them exactly that. You thought staying silent would make you look guilty, but it's the explaining that confirms it. They never needed you to answer, they needed you to react. And every time you do, they win. So what if you didn't? What if, for once, you didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't even blink? What if your silence made them nervous instead? That's not weakness, that's control. And once you understand how it works, you'll never need to explain yourself again. Nathan Blackwood was not famous. You wouldn't find his face on magazine covers or his name trending online. But in rooms that mattered, war rooms, negotiation tables, intelligence briefings, he was the quiet presence everyone deferred to. He didn't speak often. When he did, people listened. And when he was attacked, because power always attracts fire, he said nothing. He didn't flinch. He didn't explain. He let the silence stretch, and it always ended the same way. The attacker walked away looking smaller every single time. Nathan had one rule: never defend yourself. He believed defense was a reaction, and reactions, by their very nature, are signs of submission. He taught that if someone accuses you, the moment you defend is the moment you lose. Not because you're wrong, but because you let them dictate the terms of the exchange. You let them frame the scene, and now you're just an actor in their narrative. He once said, "The man who explains is a man who concedes." The man who concedes cannot lead. He wasn't cold, he was precise. He understood human psychology not as a field of study, but as a battlefield. To him, power was not in your voice, it was in your pause. In the way you could remain unmoved when provoked. When someone tried to provoke him, they expected a response. That's how they baited others. Poke, 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 until the mask slips and the real you shows up. But with Nathan, there was no mask. And no reaction, and that terrified people more than any retaliation could. In Washington, they called him the Silent Lion. In London, the man without nerves. He had the uncanny ability to turn even the most vicious attacks into echoes. People would accuse him, rant about him, speculate endlessly. He never corrected them, never clarified, never posted a statement. And the more he didn't speak, the more powerful he became. It wasn't magic, it was strategy. He knew something most never learn. When you respond, you validate. When you remain still, you shift the burden back onto them. Now they must explain, they must prove. They must justify why their accusations fell flat in front of someone who didn't even bother to catch them. That kind of presence doesn't come from arrogance, it comes from discipline. From knowing that silence, in the right hands, is not absence, it is dominance. One of his protégés asked him once, "Don't you worry people will think you're guilty if you say nothing?" He smiled, paused for a long moment, then said, "I worry more about what happens when I make them think I care." That's the edge, because when you don't defend yourself, you don't just protect your dignity, you provoke doubt in them, in the room, in everyone watching. And slowly, the frame flips. You're no longer the accused, you're the enigma. The untouchable, the one who rises above the noise and forces everyone else to question their own behavior. That's not just power, that's control. Most people don't defend themselves because they're guilty. They defend themselves because they want to be understood. That's the trap. It doesn't look like weakness. It looks human, relatable, honest. But in reality, it's emotional exposure disguised as clarity. You tell yourself, if I just explain what I meant, they'll get it. If I walk them through the context, they'll see I wasn't wrong. If I show them the truth, I'll be vindicated, but no one's actually listening for truth. They're watching for hesitation, for cracks, for signs that their words landed, that you cared enough to answer. The problem isn't that you explained. It's that you believed explaining would save you. You thought you were appealing to reason, but what you were really doing was bleeding in public. And when you bleed, the sharks come, because clarity isn't what people want in those moments. They want confirmation that they have the upper hand, and when you explain, you give it to them. You hand them the steering wheel, thinking they'll take you to peace, but they drive you into the mud over and over again. You see it every day. In the workplace, on social media, in relationships, someone gets accused. They rush to clarify. They write long messages. They issue statements. They bring receipts. And still, it's not enough. The crowd doesn't thank them. The room doesn't quiet down. In fact, the more they explain, the more suspicious they look. Because they don't realize the moment they stepped into the role of the explainer, they stepped out of power. Nathan Blackwood used to say, explaining is not a solution, it's a surrender. He never said it with cruelty. He said it like a surgeon, precise, necessary, and without apology. He watched powerful men crumble not because they were wrong, but because they tried too hard to be seen as right. There's a painful irony here. The people who defend themselves the most are usually the ones who care the most about integrity, about fairness, about being seen for who they truly are. But caring too much about perception means you're always chasing other people's approval. And when you chase approval, you give away control, the hardest truth. You will never be fully understood, not by everyone, not even by most. Some will misread you. Some will twist your words. Some will project their own fears onto your silence. That's not your burden to carry, because being understood is not the goal. Being respected is, and respect doesn't come from how clearly you explain. It comes from what you refuse to explain. From the quiet confidence that says, I know who I am, I know what I meant, and I don't owe anyone a map to follow my mind. People who truly respect you won't demand explanations, and those who demand explanations rarely deserve them. So the next time you're tempted to clarify your intent, pause, not because you're hiding, but because maybe, just maybe, you've outgrown the need to be understood. Power doesn't begin with what's said, it begins with who gets to set the terms of what's being said. That's the frame, and whoever controls the frame controls the outcome. Most people don't realize this. They walk into conversations thinking it's about truth, fairness, even logic. But the reality is, all of that gets filtered through one thing, the frame. The person who decides the tone, the definitions, the meaning wins. And if you're defending yourself, you're not holding the frame. You've stepped into theirs. Imagine you're in a meeting. Someone says, I just don't think that idea was thought through. Right there, they've built the frame. They've placed you as careless, and your first instinct is to lean forward and say, actually, I considered several angles. But it's too late. You're playing their game. You're inside their story now, trying to claw your way out. Nathan Blackwood warned about this years ago. He said, the second you play defense, you're already confirming their premise. He believed that most people don't lose influence because they were wrong. They lose because they agreed, without realizing, to play inside someone else's narrative. The frame is invisible, but it's not soft. It's steel, and when someone builds it around you, it becomes the lens through which others see you. The more you try to escape it, the more they see you as guilty, desperate, uncertain. Because every clarification you give still lives inside their world. Think about courtroom dramas. It's never really about truth. It's about who controls the framing. The lawyer who can turn a fact into suspicion, a pause into guilt, wins. They're not debating reality. They're rewriting the meaning of it. Now apply that to life. Every accusation, every insult, every offhand comment, it's a frame being offered to you. The smart ones don't accept it. They don't correct it. They reject it by refusing to even acknowledge it. Nathan had a phrase he lived by, framing is the first move, speaking is the second. He didn't speak until the room was already thinking what he wanted them to think. He shaped their lens first. And when he did speak, it never sounded like a rebuttal. It sounded like a shift in atmosphere. Here's what you need to understand. Defending yourself might feel like strength. It might feel like you're standing up for yourself. But most of the time, it's just a response to a frame someone else built. You're not reclaiming truth. You're reacting to design. So the question is no longer, how do I defend myself? The real question is, how do I make sure they never hold the frame to begin with? And the answer begins in silence, in stillness, in posture, in choosing when to speak, and more importantly, what not to speak into. Because when you stop trying to correct how people see you, you start designing how they feel you. That's not reaction, that's control. You walk into the boardroom, the air is tight, someone just threw a jab, subtle, veiled, but intentional. Maybe about your last project, maybe about your attitude. All eyes shift to you, waiting, wondering. Do you fire back? Do you explain? No, you sit still, no frown, no smirk, no shift in your breath. And suddenly, the room doesn't focus on the comment anymore. It focuses on you, not what you say, but what you don't. That's the aura of stillness. It's the presence that doesn't beg, doesn't defend, doesn't compete. It simply exists, with such certainty, such restraint, that it shifts the emotional current in the room. Samantha Drexler understood this well. CEO of one of the top tech firms in New York, people called her the quiet storm. She was the kind of leader who could silence a whole panel with a glance, not out of intimidation, but precision. When people challenged her, she didn't flinch, she didn't justify, she waited, and in that pause, people began to ask themselves, did I go too far? Did she already know something I don't? Is she not reacting because she's already won? Nathan Blackwood once said, stillness is the sound of power. He watched men raise their voices, stack arguments, dominate airtime. And he watched Samantha dismantle them all by doing nothing except sitting straighter, watching longer, and speaking later. Because the one who waits wins, not by silence alone, but by turning silence into signal, the signal that says, I am not moved by noise, I don't fear your perception, and I'll speak when the room is ready to listen. Aura isn't charisma, it's not performance, it's restraint. It's the art of saying less, so that what you do say carries more. And when people sense that, something shifts, they lean forward, they get quieter, they check themselves before they speak again, not because you commanded them to, but because your stillness became a mirror. And in that mirror, they saw the chaos of their own need to prove, to press, to provoke. Stillness, when rooted in presence, creates a tension more powerful than any outburst. It forces the world to slow down around you. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being unmoved, because the one who can sit inside discomfort without blinking owns the moment. You want to flip the room, don't raise your voice, don't match their energy. Don't give them the reaction they rehearsed for. Just hold, breathe, let the weight of your silence shift the center of gravity. And when you finally speak, make it feel like the room just exhaled. Redirection is not defense. It's dominance disguised as detachment. It's when you don't just refuse to play their game, you make them play yours. And that shift, that's when the power flips. Let's take a moment. You're in a meeting. Jeremy, always the critic, says, I guess we're trying bold ideas again. Everyone looks over. It's bait. He wants a reaction, wants to see you tighten up, lean in, explain your thinking. But you don't. You lean back, look at him, calm. And then you say, well, all right, what's your idea then? And now the room turns, but not toward you. Toward him. You didn't take the frame, you gave it back, and that forced him to perform on the spot, unprepared, exposed. That's redirection. Because most people don't insult you to win an argument, they do it to center the spotlight. And the moment you shine it back, they shrink. Nathan Blackwood once said, the strongest play is not to attack back. It's to make them overexpose their own weakness. He wasn't being clever, he was being surgical. You'll see it again in relationships. Your partner says, "You don't care about me anymore." Most people panic. That's not true. Of course I care. Look at all the things I've done. Why would you say that? But someone who understands redirection doesn't panic. They pause, let the silence hang, then calmly say, "That's not how I see it." It doesn't reject. It doesn't agree. It doesn't invite a fight. It shifts the energy from emotional outburst to grounded presence. And in that shift, the other person is now holding the drama alone. They begin to question their tone, their certainty. Was I too emotional? Did I overreact? Because you didn't absorb the blame, you reflected it. Even online, it works. Someone comments, "You're fake, all talk." You don't reply, you don't defend. You post one line. People tend to say that when they stop getting what they want. No anger, no hashtags, just detachment with edge. Now the crowd questions the attacker. The noise they created turns into silence they can't escape. That's how you bend pressure, not by resisting it, but by rerouting it. Redirection isn't just a move. It's a stance, a quiet message. I'm not here to explain myself. I'm here to watch you explain yourself to everyone else. You want to know who's really in control. It's not the one talking the most. It's the one everyone waits on. And when they finally speak, every word repositions the room. Redirect, don't react. It's not evasion, it's evolution. The deeper strategy isn't just stillness, it's absence, not silence in the room, but silence in the world they expected you to respond to. The kind that lingers like smoke after fire, the kind that turns attention into obsession. When someone attacks you, they want to feel seen. That's the core of it. The accusation is never just about truth. It's about spotlight, about dragging you into the arena, so you'll swing back and they can say, "See, he's just like I said." But when you disappear, when you don't reply, don't engage, don't even flinch, when you give them absolutely nothing, not even rejection, that's when something far more powerful happens. They start spiraling. You see it unfold in subtle ways. They repeat themselves, rephrase, get louder, they talk to others, they start dropping hints to mutual friends. They post more, all while you stay still. Why? Because people can survive being hated. They can survive being criticized. What breaks them is being ignored. They want a reaction, any reaction, a rebuttal, a laugh, even a block, just proof that they mattered enough to stir something in you. But when you don't even acknowledge the blow, when you vanish like the insult never landed, it unravels them. Nathan called this vanishing control. He taught it not as arrogance, but as removal of oxygen. When you don't feed their fire, he said, they burn alone, and that loneliness, it's devastating. There's a scene he used to describe a crowded room. Someone insults you directly, the moment hangs, all eyes shift, but you don't speak. Don't smile, don't defend, you simply rise, leave the room, and never acknowledge the incident again. The room remembers, not the insult, but the stillness. Because you weren't shaken, you disappeared, and that creates legend. It creates space for myth, for assumptions, for the kind of presence that lingers longer than explanation ever could. Your absence becomes the story. People fill in the blanks with fear, not forgiveness. They wonder what you're planning. If you even noticed, or worse, if you noticed and didn't care, that is unbearable to the insecure. They want clarity. You gave them the unknown, and the unknown, that's where power lives. It's not about proving anything. It's about becoming something they can't explain, not because you're mysterious, but because you never showed up to the trial. And in that, you became something stronger than innocent. You became unreachable. There's a final move, the sharpest one. The one that doesn't just ignore the accusation, but turns it into a weapon that cuts the other way. Someone calls you arrogant. You don't flinch. You say, strange how confidence makes some people uncomfortable. They say you're manipulative. You say, well, only those who can't be influenced say that. They say you're fake. You say, everyone says that when they stop getting what they want. These aren't comebacks, they're inversions. They take the energy thrown at you and send it back, sharper, cleaner, and colder. This is emotional judo. Let them come in heavy with accusation. Let them swing hard. You don't stop the force, you redirect it. And when they land, it's their own momentum that knocks them flat. Nathan Blackwood called it the turn of the blade. Never raise a shield. Let the attacker fall on the sword they brought to harm you. Because here's the truth. Most accusations aren't precise. They're projections. Someone feels intimidated, insecure, exposed, and they hurl words not to reveal truth, but to protect ego. So when you respond with calm inversion, what you're really doing is exposing that ego, quietly, publicly, completely. They didn't expect that. They expected you to explain, to defend, to fumble. Instead, you stayed centered. You smiled not with cruelty, but clarity, and in that moment, the entire room felt the balance shift. Now they look like the emotional one, the bitter one, the insecure one, and here's what happens next. They start defending themselves. I didn't mean it that way. I was just joking. You always take things so seriously. And with every word they say, they lose ground, because now they've become what they tried to call you. You didn't argue, you didn't attack, you just turned. And they collapsed on their own certainty. The crowd doesn't remember your quote. They remember how you made the other person shrink. That's the point. Power is not in what you say, it's in what your words do to the room. The inversion move is not for the loud, it's for the calm, the strategic, the ones who don't need applause, only outcome. It's not meant to win arguments, it's meant to end them. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when the tide turns. When the person trying to tear you down suddenly looks around and realizes no one's with them. Not because you shouted louder, not because you proved your case, but because you didn't say a word. That's leverage. When you stop defending yourself, something strange happens. People start defending you. They say, that wasn't necessary. Oh, why are you going after them? They didn't even respond, and you're still pushing. And just like that, the crowd becomes your shield. You didn't ask them to. You didn't plant the idea. Your silence did the talking. It said, I don't need to fight this, and that made them wonder, why not? People step in when they see someone being attacked who won't fight back. It awakens something primal. A need to balance the scale, especially when the target shows no fear, no desperation, no panic. Nathan Blackwood called it invisible gravity. The kind of presence that pulls others into orbit without reaching for them. He believed real power wasn't about domination. It was about drawing attention without asking for it, and influence without raising your voice. That's what happens when you don't respond. You let others do the responding for you, not out of loyalty, but out of instinct. You've shown them restraint, stillness, composure, and in a world of overreaction, that's rare. Rare things attract defenders, and here's the paradox. The more you explain yourself, the more alone you look, because when you're already arguing your own case, no one feels the urgency to step in. But if you're calm, completely still, suddenly others feel the pressure, they feel the imbalance, they feel the need to say something on your behalf, and that is the final flip. You don't have to control the narrative. You just have to make sure they're the only one talking, and when the room starts seeing you as the still point in chaos, when they start defending your name without request, that's no longer just social power, that's cultural weight. Now you're not just respected, you're protected. You don't reach this level of presence by accident. You build it, stone by stone, moment by moment, not by fighting louder, but by choosing silence when others scream. By holding your face still when they push for a twitch, by letting others collapse under the weight of their own noise. This isn't about ego, it's about discipline, because it's easy to explain yourself, easy to react. Easy to try and clear your name when the world points fingers, but the strongest ones, the ones who become untouchable, learn to resist that pull. Nathan Blackwood didn't build his power by speaking over people. He built it by knowing when not to. He once said, "You don't have to be feared to be respected, but you do have to be unreadable." That's what stillness creates, not confusion, but caution. You're not emotional, you're precise. You don't play defense because you're not on trial. You don't defend a name that isn't in question, at least not in your world, and the longer you live by that code, the more your presence hardens into something unshakable. People start speaking less around you, they check their tone. They adjust their words, not because you've demanded it, but because they feel it. The weight of what you don't say becomes more powerful than anything you could. Eventually, you stop needing tactics. You don't need a clever line. You don't need to redirect. You don't need to vanish, because you've trained the world to know your silence isn't weakness. It's a decision, and every time you hold it, you force them to play chess with a shadow. You become the man who doesn't flinch, the woman who never justifies, the presence that doesn't need to chase truth, because it lives in how you move, not what you say. Let the noise come, let them call, accuse, speculate, provoke. You're beyond it now, because power doesn't live in the answers you give, it lives in the questions they can't stop asking about you.